Hello and welcome to part 2 of the Qualitative Research Proposal webinar with Eliud Okumu. Thank you for being here, Ali. And my name is Wangari. I am the lead research mentor at Ada Africa Journal Club. Please introduce yourselves in the chat. Tell us your name, institution, research interests, and your expectation. I see already we have a few people typing. Hi, my name is Isaac Warambo. Isaac, thank you for being here. Dear Kiplagat, Masters in Criminology at Egerton. Dr. Josephine Modami, thank you for being here. Isaac, again, you say you're a special needs teacher. Pamela Rono, thank you for being here. Nancy Marika. And Josephine Modami says you'd like to learn more about QR. I assume that is qualitative research. Okay, then there is Colin Shoko, all the way from Zimbabwe, a PhD student in governance with Africa University. Thank you for being here. I believe where you are is 5 p.m., although here in Kenya it's 6 p.m. Thanks, Colin. And then Nancy Marika is from University of Nairobi, research interest in IS and SCM. Could you please write that in full? Nancy, I'm a psychologist, so I may not know all the conventions for your discipline. Oh, supply chain management, that is SCM. Okay, now I know. Marco Tomishik, is that how I pronounce your name? Maybe I butchered it a little. From University of Nairobi, political anthropology. Sante sana, and there's more people coming in. So today's session will be 1 hour. Remember last time we had a 2-hour session. We delved into qualitative research design. We had a lot of you participating and asking questions, and I believe they were all answered. And from the feedback of part 1, the session went very well, and there was a lot of learning, which is the aim of our research mentorship sessions. Just before I give the presenter, I'd like to make an announcement. On Friday, in Kenya is Eid al-Fitr. So to all our Muslim brothers and sisters, we wish you a peaceful and sacred time of breaking the fast. Now in the evening on Friday, we have a very major event with 3 partners. So Ada Africa will be partnering with Africa Archive, who are the preprint repository for Africa. So if you have any articles, even those which have not yet been published into journal articles, which are in the form of preprints, feel free to upload them onto the Africa Archive platform. We'll also be partnering with TCC Africa, that is Training Center in Communication Africa, as well as pre-review. So Ada Africa and the 3 partners are bringing to you a huge, mega peer review session. We have an article we are looking at, and we'll be meeting to peer review it. Please don't miss that session this Friday, 6 p.m. Kenya time, from 6 p.m. to 7:30 p.m. Since it will be a public holiday, I think most of us have no excuse. So I'll be looking forward to seeing all of you there on Friday. So without further ado, I will invite the speaker. Allow me not to introduce you only because I had done so last time. I hope that is okay with you, Eliud. But feel free to introduce yourself and tell us anything else you'd like us to know about you as you begin. So you're welcome. You may start.
Thank you, Jace. As you've said, Eliud. I'm a student and also a lecturer at Egerton University. I'm doing a PhD in sociology, but specifically social protection. That's my focus. Due to time constraints, I think that suffices for now. So what I will do next is just to go through what I have for today. And because the time is short, what I'll do is just to whet your appetite for more more reading, more research on qualitative data analysis. So I will not do a lot of detail today, but it suffices to say that I just want to whet your appetite for qualitative data analysis. I will share my screen. I hope today I don't have to pressurize others to do it for me.
Yeah, we can see it.
Yes. Yes, so that's what you're going to look at, qualitative data analysis. And this is what I intend to share with you within the next hour. That is just a brief, just in passing, what is this data that you want to analyze? And then we will be asking ourselves, how do we analyze qualitative data? And then lastly, just to do a quick overview of the softwares available to us for qualitative data analysis. So just the three, that's what I intend to share with you within the next hour. Just to remind us, and this is what we had last time. I think this is just a quick review of what we had discussed the last time. That's qualitative research. We are basically interested in understanding experiences. We are interested in constructing the world from the people's perspective. Most importantly, that qualitative research is about words, and the words are the data that we want to analyze. We want to look at how to analyze that this evening. Again, just recapping what we did last time, that in-depth interview is about experiences and perceptions. Focus group discussion, we want to look at unique insights that are shared by a group. And then observation, we're just learning people's behaviors in their natural settings. And then document review, we are looking at, communication that is already recorded somewhere. Quickly, what is qualitative data? And this qualitative data comes in many forms. It comes in terms of, stories, writings, comments, articles, all that forms part of the qualitative data that you want to analyze. It can be from transcriptions, interviews, or focus group discussions, or even just conversations. And then could be audio recordings or music. So somebody may just be interested in analyzing or studying the music of a particular group or particular community. Could be video recording, could be pictures. Like, I see a couple of photos during campaigns in any political election, and one may just want to understand what informs or what drives those those pictures, the formation of those pictures. So that is basically what the kind of data that we are up against, that we want to analyze as qualitative when you're doing qualitative research. So they're very varied, and therefore that calls for multiplicity. It enables us to have multiplicity of different forms of analysis that we will be able to look at in a few minutes. Again, just quickly to say that qualitative data analysis is just a process or a procedure where we move from that qualitative, from that recording, from that story, from that interview, and we move it towards providing and explaining that whatever information that we've gotten, whether they are focus group discussions, whether they are pictures. So we move that data to an explanation because we want to understand it and interpret the same. That is what qualitative data analysis is all about. And then the other thing that I also need to mention is that qualitative data analysis is largely grounded on interpretive philosophy, which basically means that we are looking at the experiences that people have, and we want to interpret those experiences from what we've been told, from the interviews, from the discussions that we've had, from the observation that we've done, and we want to try and interpret that information. So that's basically interpretive philosophy. This is the cycle of how this runs. First of all, we generate the data. We want to organize the data. And because qualitative data is, qualitative data we get a lot of information. There is need to organize that data. And in the process of when you organizing this data, there is need to read and reread. So the data that we've collected, whether they are transcriptions, whether they are recordings, because sometimes we record conversations, we record discussions. And as we do that, we need to listen to it, read through, so that we are able to make sense out of that information. And the reason why we are doing all that, the reason why we are reading and rereading that information is because we want to identify themes, because we want to determine the attitudes and the general behavior of the population that we are studying. And then as we reread and reread the notes, then we put themes that seem very close. We put them together. We amalgamate them together. and then we interpret. And even as we interpret the data, unlike when you do quantitative data analysis, when you put together the data and you already have them together, then you do the interpretation at the end, and that's it. But in the case of qualitative data analysis, as we interpret, we still read the notes to be able to make sense out of it so that we can be able to correctly interpret the same information. So this is just a brief about the cycle, the spiral through which we do qualitative data analysis. Just on some of the steps that we go through as we do qualitative data analysis, and this just, I'm just putting together how this should run, not necessarily that this is cast on stone, because as you've seen, we keep doing back and forth when you're doing qualitative data analysis. So these steps they're just trying to pull them out of the whole process of reading and rereading, interpreting, and creating themes out of the data that we have. So the first step has to do with the raw data management. So this is about, we are in a process of preparing and organizing the data that we have so that we can have them make sense to us and identify the unit of analysis. So we may have text, we may have images, and as we review this data, we find that you will find that some of them is not useful to us, or is not even, they may be useful, but not relevant to the study that we are carrying out. So the first step is to try and manage that information. And this is what I'm talking about. So I have a transcription that I borrowed from some study that somebody did, where, you're doing an interview and you're interviewing someone. And as you do the interview, when you're doing an interview, because it's not so structured, you don't control what people say, you may have a lot of information that is not even relevant to the study. So sometimes as we do the reading and rereading the data that we have, we find that there is part of it that doesn't make sense, for example, or is not useful. It may make sense, but it's not useful. For instance, in our daily speech, we often say, and that comes part of the data, especially if you're doing it, if it's transcribed from a recording. Then somebody says, I can't think of a particular example right now. So when you look at all these data, then you realize that part of it is not so useful. So we begin to narrow the data that you have so that we reduce the volume and remove the parts that are not so useful to the study. That continues in step 2, where we are reducing the data that we have. And this is just about, the reading and reading that I was talking about helps us to make a sense of the data that we have, but we basically become part of the data. And as we become part of the data that you're looking at, then we understand it more. We are able to categorize it much better. We are able to, draw themes that are emerging from a particular study that we are looking at. So that reduction process, the reduction process of part 1, is useful in terms of bringing down the data that, reducing the data that we are studying, or the data that we have collected. That continues into what you're calling winnowing. If you think about winnowing just in a traditional sense, we are actually removing chaff. So we are removing the dirt. We are removing information that is not so useful to us. And at this point in time, we begin to have some preliminary codes or cluster of data, or some similarities within the data that we are looking at. So this FGD, this interview that we conducted, we begin to see some similarities in terms of the information that we collected. Then again, at that particular point, that is the time to begin to develop a code list, a master code book, where we can be able to push information that is similar to one particular point or one particular corner, if I may say so. My screen has hanged again. Okay, now here we are moving. So this process of reducing the data reduction also has this component of chunking, clustering the data that you have. Whatever that is similar, we can begin to chunk them together. We can begin to put them together. And you're putting them together along the themes that we were identifying as we are reading and rereading the data that we have. It is also useful to note that in qualitative research, a lot of some of the softwares that we have will help us by doing color coding. So we are able to identify the similarities along the colors, like what I've tried doing here. What is similar, we put them in a particular color, like in this case, things that describe the person or the credentials of the person, I put them in red. Personal struggles that the person went through in this PhD study, like we all know PhD studies, especially in Africa, is a struggle. So we put that together again. And then the shifting or identity that the person is bringing out in this process of interview, again, we can put that in a different color. So that is the chunking that you're talking about. So you have the raw data and you can begin to you can begin to see the themes, and then you color code the themes that are emerging from the study. Still, reduction is useful. So it happens again, step 2 or part 2 of that reduction. So we continually cluster, assigning chunks and labeling them using colors. You could use, we can use colors, we can use numbers. So it's generally the common coding that we do even in qualitative research. So we do that again that we do in quantitative research, we do that again in qualitative research. In other words, what I'm saying is that the information that is similar is given a particular code. So we do that all through. This is the point again to develop a code book so that we know what we mean. If we write 1, what does 1 represent? Does it represent the personal struggles of the person? Does it represent the qualities that he had that enabled him or her to succeed in a particular area? So we begin to code and we develop a code book at the same time. The coding process, coding in qualitative research happens a number of times because we do it, the first time we do it, we end up with maybe 20, 30, 40 categories. But this can be reduced further into very broad themes so that we have specific codes where a lot of information can fall in. So that refining process, that reduction process happens a number of times. We don't stop. We don't do a code at the beginning and decide that that is enough. So then we drop it and we stay with that. We continually code, we continually reduce the codes based on similarities, based on the themes that are emerging from a particular study. Okay. And these codes that I'm talking about may be drawn from 2 perspectives. Either we can draw codes from literature, or we can draw codes from some theoretical frame that we've gone through. So it is either from literature that we have or some theoretical frame, or they can happen inductively, in the sense that the code that we are developing is emerging from the study that we've already conducted. From the data that we have, we generate codes within the data. So we have a decision to make. Either we are doing it based on literature and therefore priori codes, or based on the study that we've conducted, and therefore we are trying to develop a theory inductively from the data that we've collected. For example, if I'm doing a study on like I did a study on street children, and one of the things that I was investigating was about some of the factors that drive children away from home to the streets. And most in a couple of literature that I went through, the common thing is that children leave their homes for the streets because of poverty. So from the literature, if I go out there and collect data, and a child is telling me that I left home because there was no food, I left home because I didn't have clothes, then I can pull that together under the code of poverty. but that is drawn from literature. But I could as well do that from the data that I have, and just develop codes, poverty, and build together themes that fall within that particular code. So we can develop codes based on literature or priori or inductively. This is a sample, just an example of how to code or chunk together the information. So we have a transcript from an interview, and I've used different colors just to demonstrate what is similar that can be put together. For instance, from this study, from this data, you say, I always wanted to get my doctorate. So that is, the red would represent the credentials, so the interest. And you see, as we move to the second, the second line, then I reached a point in my career where I saw that without these credentials. So basically, it's information that is similar. And then the struggles, and then the shift in identity from me to working with other people. So this kind of coding helps us to put information together. So even if this was an interview from a particular individual, if I go to the next interview data, again, I can be able to categorize and then put together and say, for example, out of the 50 or the 30 or the 20 people that were interviewed, this number had this kind of struggles, this number had this kind of credentials. So that helps in terms of pulling the data together. Okay, so as the next step in this data analysis, qualitative data analysis, is to try and interpret them on the basis of themes that we have created. So themes keep emerging, as we read and relook at the data that we've collected. The themes keep emerging, and as they emerge, we could put them together. Either we can lump them together, chunk them together, and begin interpretation. Or sometimes as we do the reading and rereading, the next thing that is likely to happen is that we may have other themes emerging while we had already thought that we've already captured all the themes. So qualitative research, we are allowed to go back and just increase the themes, increase the clusters that we had, because the data is speaking, the data is giving us direction. We don't have a fixed direction for the data that we've collected. So in step 3, we begin to look at the themes and try to interpret that data that we have collected. And this interpretation, of course, is influenced or is guided by the research questions that we had from the word go. From the proposal stage, of course, we had research questions that we wanted to answer. So the themes should be aligned to be able to answer the research questions. Again, using the same example, the same themes emerge. Initially, I talked about the credentials of this individual, the struggles, and the shift in terms of identity. We are now moving from this particular individual to working with others to be able to achieve the objective that we set out to answer. So the themes emerge in that sense. Then the representation of the presentation, we do interpretation and analysis of this qualitative data, and this interpretation and analysis happens simultaneously. In qualitative research, unlike quantitative research or data, we analyze and interpret concurrently. We have no time to do analysis and then move to interpretation. As we read and reread the transcripts that we have, we are able to begin to interpret the data. If, for example, like in my case, when the children told me how they traveled from home to the streets, I'm able to pick out the struggles that they've carried with them, the way they traveled, whether they traveled, the number of kilometers that they covered to be able to get to the streets, how they were fed, by different people on the streets. So when I do that, as I read the interview transcripts, I'm at the same time analyzing that data to be able to give, an in-depth information about what they are talking about. So the interpretation happens as we read and reread the data that we have collected. And the themes that emerge become the story, they become the narration. For example, if a child, like in my case, when children told me that they had to jump into a moving lorry, travel with the lorry, holding, on the lorry, and you travel 5-10 kilometers away, that can tell you the determination to move away from the environment where this child was, because it means that you're hanging onto a lorry for 10 minutes. If you hang on a lorry for 10 minutes, it's very difficult. But now this one has to hang for 1 hour. I can see the determination, to run away from the environment where the child finds himself in. And that interpretation, so that happens as I do the analysis, and I can be able to see, try and interpret the data as well as do the analysis as I move forward. And then with those stories, with those themes, for example, I have a theme of struggles for children. They become the stories that I want to present. So that story is what I'll share with the public. That is what I'll share with in my thesis. So what I'm saying is this, that in qualitative research, interpretation and analysis happen concurrently. There's no time that you're saying, now we are doing analysis, then we'll do interpretation at a later stage. We run them concurrently. So, and in this representation, the data can be, the data is presented in terms of stories, in terms of narratives. We do chronology of events, can be flashback, can be themes, and we can still, using the different data analysis tools that or softwares that are available to us today, we can be able to present that data in terms of figures. We can be able to present the data in terms of tables. We can present that data in terms of charts. So unlike previously when these softwares were not available, we had to put that in terms of stories or in terms of narration. At this point in time, you can use the same data, qualitative data, and present them in terms of tables, in terms of charts. And that is, that makes it very presentable. Anybody who wants a quick review of the information that we have, we can have it in terms of charts or in terms of figures. So that's how we present data. More specifically, you see, those steps are generic. They apply to the many techniques that are available in qualitative research. So even if we do thematic analysis, we'll still have some bit of reading and rereading. If we're doing narrative analysis, we'll still do reading and rereading. If we are doing content analysis, again, the same. So essentially what I'm saying is that those steps are generic. They are applicable at different points in time of this analysis that we have. However, that is not to say that we don't use specific technique for particular research projects. I may do a narrative analysis for a particular study, and somebody else might, depending on the study that they are carrying out, they decide that I want to do a discourse analysis. And especially that studies are different, especially that the contexts that you're studying that are different. Because, for example, if you're doing, you're analyzing conversations, then discourse analysis lends itself more compared to thematic or narrative analysis. So depending on the study that you're carrying out, then that will determine the kind of analysis that we want to do. So looking at these techniques, each of them, thematic analysis simply is systematically identifying, organizing, and offering insight into the patterns of meanings of a data set. So we are looking at organizing the data and having patterns that emerge from the study. From 10 interviews or 20 interviews, then I can see, for example, poverty seems to be emerging and is emerging in different words. Then that becomes a theme that I want to pursue, a theme that I want to analyze. So for that reason, thematic analysis becomes very useful in terms of helping us to identify, organize, and offer insight into the patterns of meanings that are emerging from the study. In other words, thematic analysis looks at the common meanings, the commonalities that emerge from an interview, from a focus group discussion. So we try to make sense on the basis of commonalities that emerge from a particular study. So that is thematic analysis. The next one is narrative analysis. This is about analyzing content, and can be observation, can be field notes, can be surveys. We are able to do a narrative analysis. We're able to do a narrative analysis from the interviews that we've conducted. But the major distinction here that I also will draw this again when you look at discourse analysis, is that narrative analysis focuses on individual speeches, and therefore lends itself more to interviews that are conducted one-on-one, so that the individual information is analyzed and looked at, the emerging stories, the experience that emerge from the different individuals become a narrative analysis. And I've just mentioned that it's different from a discourse analysis, because discourse analysis is much more about conversation or interactions between individuals, while narrative analysis is about the individual speeches or information that they provide. Content analysis, on the other hand, we are analyzing documented data. So we have this book, we have this text, we have these stories that have been documented, and we analyze that data. That's what content analysis is all about. So it is documented, it is written, just like we talked about document review as a method of data collection. So that document that we have, we read it, review it, and that information that we gather, or the commonalities that we gather from that text, become content analysis. So we can be analyzing information that is already documented out there, and that becomes our content analysis. Discourse analysis, it's more of, those who do languages and linguistics are much more stronger with discourse analysis, because they're looking at patterns of conversations in an interaction between individuals, between groups. That interaction is what we analyze when it comes to qualitative data analysis. And that analysis, that is what we are referring to as discourse analysis. And like I said, the difference between discourse analysis and narrative analysis is that narratives focus on the individual, discourse analysis focuses on much more on interactions or conversations that happen between people in an environment. Then I think this should be the last technique, the grounded analysis, of course, drawn from grounded theory. But this is about trying to determine or providing an explanation as to why a given phenomena happened. And we're doing this from qualitative data. When you do causal, or when we try to explain why a phenomena happens, from a quantitative point of view, it's normally very easy, because we use those hard statistics. We use, you do chi-squares, you do Cramer's, you do regression to be able to determine causal relationship between variables, between events, and therefore we determine causality. But in qualitative research, we are looking at consistencies. We are looking at consistencies that emerge from a narrative explanation. So if I went out there and did an interview, and in my interview, what is emerging out of 10, 15 interviews that I've conducted, what is emerging is that, out of these 10, 15 children, each of them is telling me that they left home because they wanted to go to school. Then it will tell me that one of the drivers towards the streets is the desire for education. So we're trying to do causal explanation of social phenomena, but from the perspective of qualitative data that we have. So to that extent, we use grounded analysis, or we do grounded theory. But additionally, what I need to emphasize is that in grounded analysis, we often do comparison throughout. We are doing comparison of the information that we have to be able to see the emerging consistencies or differences that emerge from the study of the data that we collected. So those are the techniques. Before I jump here, I think unless if there is any question, maybe I can address one or two, and then we can come back to this.
Thank you so much, our facilitator. Always amazing whenever you train us. And I'm already seeing comments in the chat. Members, we are now opening up to plenary up to the top of the hour. And please feel free to type your introduction, tell us your name and your comments or questions. So I see here some comments and questions, and I'll begin with Dorothy Obengo. She says she's teaching at Moffat Bible College and preparing for future research when she enrolls for her PhD. This is so informative and helpful, sir. I will definitely enjoy coding. So then Dorothy also would like to know, no, this is somebody else. This is, let me see, Joy Ann. Joy Ann is asking, would content analysis be ideal for media content, such as videos, photos, and feedback engagement?
Mm-hmm. Right.
Yeah, maybe we can pick that one. Yeah.
All right. I can pick that and talk about it in a minute. Is there any other?
Members, if you also would like to speak, we would like to hear your voice. Just raise your virtual hand, so then you can unmute and speak. The raising hand feature is at the reactions, so you can press raise hand. I don't see any raised hands so far.
Okay.
So maybe proceed for now.
All right. Oh, Abdullahi has raised his hand.
Oh, good. Abdullahi, welcome. Please unmute.
Hello, sir.
Hello, how are you, Abdul?
Hello, hello, sir. How is work? Sir?
Good. Karibu.
I actually have a question to ask concerning qualitative research.
Mm-hmm.
It's actually one of the thing I have in mind to do at PhD level.
Yeah.
Because I'm thinking of assessing experience of nurses in a particular procedure that they have done in the hospital. The challenges they face, but I actually don't have much background on it. Last week I was in a proposal defense whereby some of my senior colleagues at PhD are presenting some method, like they are doing what you call mixed method design. I realized they are putting both quantitative or qualitative method together. Then it is new to me. I don't know how can I be able to to have a good background concerning these qualitative concepts.
Okay, thank you. So you want to go exclusively qualitative, or you want to mix?
I want to go exclusively qualitative.
Okay, that would be a good one. But in the Kenyan universities, those who do hard statistics are not very comfortable doing pure qualitative, but it's doable. That is not to say it's a wrong thing to do, because qualitative research is also equally useful. And in any case, a number of studies that we do today, we can't end up at quantitative level. We have to go both qualitative and quantitative. But maybe just you still have to hold your interest and continue with the qualitative research, and because when you want to document experiences, then there is no way you can quantify that and therefore go quantitative. It's predominantly qualitative. However, if your interest is to explain, get the depth and explain causality, then the best would be to do a mixed method. But that is not to say that you cannot do qualitative. Because if my interest is to look at experiences, then that would be it. I wouldn't have to go quantitative. But because more often people will ask you, so what? The so what question is more often answered around quantitative research and data. But then for you to provide explanation as to why things happen the way they happen, then qualitative data becomes very useful, because it provides a lot of evidence in terms of what is happening out there. So if you are able to ground your study that you want to do experience documentation, then qualitative would be very strong, would be very useful for that particular kind of a study. However, most supervisors will tell you to mix. The other thing is that Anne had asked whether content analysis is possible with media, photos, videos, and feedback engagement. When you do content analysis, you could mix. I wouldn't advise for exclusively content analysis for pictures and videos and feedback engagement that you may want to do. So I would advise that you mix that and just look at for possibly do a thematic analysis so that you can be able to see the themes that emerge from the photos or from the videos that you're watching. So then you can be able to do content analysis and thematic analysis. So I would go for both rather than going one way.
All right. And then we have Eric Okot. He types in the chat. Good evening. The coding passed me. Could you briefly explain it once again? And then again, Zainab, you just joined us. Thank you for coming all the way from Nigeria, University of Maiduguri. This session is really insightful. Many thanks to the facilitator. Unfortunately, I missed part 1. Oh, that was the last session we had. Is there any way I can have the recording? Yes, Zainab, you can get the recording. I will share the email address for you to request that. Mwangi is commenting causality. I don't know if Mwangi, you are responding to something in the conversation there. And Mwangi again says qualitative must apply because you have to answer the so what. Well said. All right. Rose from Strathmore University, Rose Barasa, glad to be part of this session, learned a lot. Daniel Iliasu Lawrence says, incisive and empowering facilitation. However, I also missed part 1. Can we get the recording? A lot of people missed part 1, but a lot more joined us last time. We had a wonderful session to do more on the design. Today, we are talking more on the analysis, and maybe for me to just add my question there, just on the wording analysis, I would say it's a misnomer because in qualitative, we are doing more of synthesis. So maybe comment on that. And the other word is data. I've heard you say data. Do we use the word data or do we use the word findings? So, please tell us more about that.
Wow.
So those are my 2 questions. I see other hands are raised, but maybe we can take those ones first and then we take the ones whose hands are raised.
Sorry, Joyce, I think there was somebody who was speaking in the background. I didn't get you so clear.
No, I've muted her. It was
okay.
Background noise.
Yeah, so we could just go again on the question.
Oh, sure. Yes, there were quite a number.
No, not the other ones, but the last one that you've raised yours.
Oh, mine. So the misnomer, I think, is when we say analysis instead of synthesis and also data instead of findings. Do we call it data or do we call it findings?
Okay. Today Aurelia is not in. Aurelia has always backed me up on this.
Yes, Aurelia is a qualitative expert. She's actually doing a qualitative study right now, so she could not join us.
Yeah.
Doing an FDB somewhere.
All right. So somebody asked about coding, and the question is whether, I don't know whether the question is about what is coding or how do we code in qualitative research. So allow me to just answer it on the basis of how do we code in qualitative research. The coding in qualitative research, in this case, is about, just looking for similarities. Because you could have a story of, somebody can give you a narration or a story of 1 or 3 pages. Then you have another story, a narrative from a particular individual, 1 or 3, 4 pages. But in all those stories, then you could be able to see some similarities in those stories. You could be able to see similarities in terms of, for example, if I want to look for an example that would possibly help us clarify this. If I'm discussing why, last time I was talking about why there is a lot of violence in the household, especially during Corona period. If that is what I want to study, I want to just try and understand why there are too many cases of domestic violence at home. And when we talk domestic violence, of course, we are talking about both ways, either the man beating the woman or the woman beating the man. So we are looking at why that is happening. And out of 3-4 interviews that I've conducted, in each and every interview, like I had a discussion with, just informally trying to understand why that is happening. And somebody told me that there is a lot of violence in the household because the social satisfaction that people get out there, all the avenues for social satisfaction have been closed. For instance, the church is closed where when I'm stressed, I can run to. So where do I go with my stress? I go with it home. When I'm stressed, I go out there to the stadium to watch a football match. Now that is not happening. So if in my study, out of the 10 interviews or discussions that I've had, then I find that the issue of going out to be with friends is emerging. Then I can have that as one of the themes and I can code it, say 1, or I can give it a name. So to that extent, we are able to code, qualitative information. And the coding is basically just to help us put together what is similar or what is different. So then we can be able to understand them or interpret them collectively. Then there is the issue of causality, and I think Mwangi was pointing out to this, the issue of causality, and especially when it comes to qualitative research. Qualitative research can help us, we can be able to determine causality on the basis of information that we've gotten. And that's why grounded theory becomes very a critical theory that we often have to use in most qualitative studies, because you're saying that this phenomena is occurring because of 1, 2, 3. In other words, this event is causing this other event. That the violence that is happening, domestic violence that is happening at the household level, is due to the fact that people are staying more at home and they're not going to watch football matches, they're not going to the churches, they're not going to, every meeting place that we often meet when there's no COVID. So to that extent, we are only saying that that could be the cause of the violence, and therefore we are explaining causality. Joyce has mentioned, do we talk about synthesis or analysis? And my simple take on this is that the documentation that we have in books, I think, is influenced by the tradition, is influenced by previous dominance of quantitative studies. Because in quantitative studies, we often talk about analysis. So even in the writings that you will get, most of the writings that you'll get will always be referring to analysis. However, the truth is that we are doing a synthesis. We are putting together the information or the conversations that we've collected out there in the field. But because of the dominance of the traditional dominance of quantitative data, quantitative studies, you will find most literature still referring to talking about analysis as opposed to synthesis. So allow me. Okay, go ahead, Jason.
Yeah, there are a few more comments, but finish what you were going to say.
Oh, I wanted to jump to the next session.
Oh, okay, so you still have more to, there are a few comments and a few hands raised. Do we take the hands now? Or
yes, we can take the hands and then I can run through the others.
All right, so Joyanne, grateful to the team for all the good work. You're welcome, Joy. Then Colin, this is a great session which is helping to demystify the subject of qualitative research. Greatly appreciated. So we have 2 people whose hands are raised. We'll start with Zuta, then Linda. So Zuta, welcome. Please unmute your audio and your video if you like.
Yes, thank you very much for allowing me to ask this question. When I read through most of the literature respect to qualitative research, in terms of the number that should be selected to make the data representative, they are saying we should always use small size or small sample size of the qualitative data because conducting interview always consumes more time or it takes more time. So my question now is there any percentage range that can be used on the sample to make the data representative, or you can just pick any number as it's indicated that small sample size should be used? Thank you.
Thank you. Joyce, you had another hand?
Linda, welcome.
Okay, thank you so much. The session is very, very informative. I missed the first part and I feel like hitting myself like a lot. Anyway, I have a question regarding the grounded analysis. Currently, I'm doing a study whereby I'm mixing both quantitative and qualitative. And as by my understanding, when you're doing a grounded analysis, more of an inductive sort of analysis whereby you, or rather from the literature I've read, it's like it's easier to get more from the grounded theory if you don't have and I don't have much information about the phenomena that you are really studying. But now I already have, or rather I have literature based on the quantitative aspect of my study. Then or rather the question is, for me having already literature for the study, will the grounded theory aspect of it be affected? Or it's just okay? Because I'm sort of worried because I already have literature. I already have identified themes. So going to the grounded theory, will it, because it's more of an inductive aspect, so will it be something that is a plus, or it's something that it's detrimental for my study?
Right. Thank you, Linda. Let me start with your case, whether now that you have literature and whether that is going to be affected when you go out there in the field. You see, grounded theory helps us to be able to generate, begin to theorize. So even though you have literature that is saying this is going to cause this, or this phenomena is happening because of 1, 2, 3, when you go out in the field, the data that you collect will further either explain whatever you are saying that you are doing now, or it will negate the information that you have at this point in time. But grounded theory allows you to provide an argument, or analysis allows you to have an argument on the basis of data that you have collected. So the theory can emerge. The theory will emerge after data collection, and it will help you either affirm the arguments that you've put forward in your literature review or negate the same. So it is a plus that you have a grounded theory at this point in time after doing literature review, and you have the theory or information or an argument emerging from the literature. So when you go out there to collect data, whether you use interviews or focus group discussion, that is going to either help you to affirm or negate the existing theory, and it allows you to generate a theory that will be emerging on the basis of data that you have collected. Then there's the question of the sample size, whether there is any specific range where that determines the number of people we have to interview or conduct FGDs. And my answer is there's none. This varies with every study that you are conducting. I once read a paper that was published in a very highly reputed journal. And the data was collected from basically 5 people. And the argument was, the argument in the methodology that the person used was that these are people who have taught, because it was about performance in physics during COVID-19. And the argument was that these are people who've taught physics for the last, I needed people who've taught physics 10 years before COVID, and now they are in this situation. And therefore I want to understand whether that is COVID is going to affect the performance. So if you use that as an inclusion criteria, then it reduces the number of people that we can significantly, engage in a qualitative study. So the sample size is dependent on the kind of study that we want to do. If, for example, you are in an area and you want to study, say, the influence of disability in terms of participation in community development, and the number of people with disability that we can find in this particular area are only 10, then it is the 10 that we will collect the data from. So there is no specific range in terms of the number, the sample size. But additionally, I need to add that qualitative research, we are not interested in making generalizations. We are interested in providing depth of the information that we have collected. So to that extent, that would be the reason. That would be the reason for the numbers, the small numbers, or the huge numbers that you can get in a qualitative study.
All right.
With that, yeah, okay.
I was wondering, do you still have more slides to get through? Because I still see 2 hands and we ran out of time.
Yeah, for sure, because I'm only seeing 4 minutes, but maybe I can just, because this slide will be shared, okay. I can just say something briefly about the softwares.
All right, please proceed.
Maybe just for 5 minutes.
All right, and then we will take the questions after.
Yes, so these are some of the qualitative data analysis softwares that are available. A couple of them, like Max, QDA, and Vivo, these ones we have to buy, but you have these ones that are free, open, we can be able to use them to analyze whatever data that we have. And just looking at these softwares, and I just want to speak to what Anne was asking earlier. QuickOS, I'm not sure I know how to pronounce it very well, but QuickOS helps you to, visualize and analyze data that is based on vision or observations or pictures. You can use this to analyze them. But more specifically, QDA Miner, this again there's a free trial that you can use to analyze qualitative data. And I think one thing that I want to say about it is that QDA Miner allows us to integrate both statistical data and qualitative data, and therefore is very useful when you're conducting mixed methods. So when you're doing mixed method research, then QDA Miner becomes one of the best softwares that you can go out for. The only problem with it is that the user support, the interface is not very easy to pick up. So you need to have a lot of information. You need to have training to be able to do it. In Vivo, I'm sure this is common to many of us. But again, just saying one thing about it is that most types of files are accepted in NVivo. You can do PDF, you can do Word. The only challenge with NVivo, the major challenge that I noticed with it, is that, again, it requires a very steep learning curve. We have to go very through thorough training to be able to use NVivo. It's not an easy one for most of us. And it is also very time consuming when you're coding. The other one is DDoS. DDoS, this has a very, it's good, especially when we are doing multiple analysis. If you have a team that is analyzing similar data, then it becomes very good for us. Then the other thing is that it's internet-based, and therefore we can be able to, you can be able to save, you can access it very easily. You can be able to, anybody out there, because if we're using a web-based analysis, then we can be analyzing the same data sitting together, somebody in Nairobi, somebody in Nigeria, somebody in South Africa, and we are able to see the data and analyze it together. So that's a beautiful thing about it. It doesn't quickly do an auto-coding, because when you're using some of these qualitative data analysis softwares, they do auto-code. So if I'd mentioned, for example, poverty, then I get another data set that is talking about poverty, it will easily autocode the same. So that is not possible with DDoS. Atlas TI, again, this has been with us for a lot of time. It's been there for a long time now. The one beautiful thing that I saw with this is the aspect that we can be able to use Google Earth as an embedded infrastructure within the Atlas TI. So just mentioning a few things about this data analysis softwares. So that's one thing that I thought was very beautiful about this software. Then the other thing is that it has a very good user support. So once you log in, it can support, you can easily learn, one can easily learn on their own. Again, it also suffers the challenge of not able to automatically generate codes. So we definitely have to do coding on our own. That's it. And thank you very much. Back to you, Joyce, then we can take a few questions. It's yes.
So Josephat Ngesa says, thanks for clarifying the issue on generalization because I was getting confused. Helen Kilelo says, in other words, data saturation should help one determine sample size. So that is very well said.
Yes.
So we'll take the question from Zainab and then from Eda. I'd like to request all of us for an extra 5 minutes or so. So please bear with us. Of course, if you have to hop on to your next Zoom meeting, you can go. But also please fill in the feedback form. It is very important to us to know how the session went, and you will be sent this recording and the slides. So Zainab, welcome.
Yeah, thank you very much for this very informative session. My question is, for if during qualitative analysis or carrying out qualitative research, when you code, do come up with your themes and you have your results and your findings, at the end, is it compulsory that you must have a section where you must clearly state the number of people who think a certain way? For instance, say 3 people said poverty is the reason why children run away from school and home, or 5 people said they think abuse is the reason why children run away from home. Must you do that in qualitative research? Thank you.
Thank you. And maybe just to take that immediately, that in qualitative research, the numbers are not the most important thing that you're looking out for. We're looking out for, in-depth information about a phenomena that you're studying. When you talk about the magnitude, because even if I've interviewed 5 or 6 people, that does not necessarily provide the magnitude of a given phenomena in a particular place. And therefore, qualitative research moves away from that, because qualitative research, and that's why in the modern day studies, people are encouraged to go mixed method, so that you have the magnitude where you're talking about the numbers of the people that you have interviewed, you're talking about the magnitude of a given phenomenon in a given area, but then you go out and after doing your quantitative studies, that is if you're doing qual, then you go out there and look for the details of this particular phenomena. So the prevalence, the magnitude should not be a major concern in a qualitative research. But we can, because we need to validate the information that you're providing. So the validation comes in, for example, when you provide a transcript of a verbatim communication that somebody provided, and either through the interviews or through the focus group discussions that we did, but the number is not and should not be a major thing when you're doing a qualitative study.
Right, I think we'll take one last question, but I see more questions in the chat. I don't know how to go about this. I don't know if you have more time for us. You can be with us all evening, our facilitator. I'll take Eda, and maybe I can suggest that you can respond to this later because we've saved the chat, or you can tell us if you'd like to respond to all the questions now. What do you think, Eliud?
I think because I'm sure the questions may keep coming, what we can do that I can have, you can have my email at the end of my email and my number at the end of the presentation. Then we can have the conversation. I'll be more than willing to discuss or engage with the participants' questions as we move forward.
Wonderful. Yeah, please share. Did you say you'll share your email address?
Yes, I can share that.
Okay, yeah, please do that as Eda asks the last question. Eda, please make it brief, 30 seconds. Welcome.
Yeah, thank you, Wangari. In fact, I was trying to lower my hand, but I've been unable. I think I've heard somebody mention it. It was just about data saturation, where the quality and quantity is no longer now coming out. There are no more themes being observed. So I wanted to add that in addition to the other points that you told us. Sorry, let me try to lower the hand now.
Oh, and thank you for being here. Yeah, we are all on the steep learning curve. Thank you so much, Elliot, for being a wonderful facilitator. I've learned a lot personally, and I'm sure the people on this call can agree with me. There are still people joining. I don't know.
Interestingly.
This conversation is not about to end. We'll keep it up on the group, on the WhatsApp group, and with the contacts that you have shared in the chat. So I'd like to ask everyone to switch on their videos as I give Elliot the last word. If you would like, we'll do a screenshot, a gallery screenshot, just to know that we were all here. So
yeah.
Thank you so much, only if you can. Yeah, I see a lot of thank yous coming through. Thank you so much for being here. And I think we should have more sessions on qualitative. When you mentioned the softwares, I thought, oh my goodness, we need another session now on just the qualitative softwares. A lot of people asked about those. So yeah, thank you so much, everyone, for making time this evening to be here. And Elliot, do you have any last words to say as we leave?
And just to say thank you very much for everyone for finding time. It's not easy to find time for learning this evening, this late, especially in Kenya now. People are about to take suppers and go to bed. Thank you very much for finding time. These are colleagues from other parts of Africa. Thank you very much for finding time. And I think I'll be glad to continue the conversation in any other form. Once I share the slides with Joyce, she'll be able to share with everyone, and then you can be able to have the conversation either through email or through phone, WhatsApp. I'll gladly respond. Thank you very much.
Wonderful, and thank you for sharing your contacts. All right, everyone, have a good evening.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you for being here.
Bye, and thank you.
All right, so I think I can end the meeting now.
Sure.
All right, thank you so much.
All right.
Okay.